Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our FII session on Beyond the Black Swans, what are the new pathways to global growth? I'm Nadira, Tudor, and I'm very happy to be here as your moderator for this important discussion with a panel of the highest caliber of global thinkers. Our overall key aims this year is to challenge the thought processes of policymakers, business leaders, academics, and investors, so that together we can shape the future and we can tackle our global economy constructively and positively as we face recovery after this unprecedented global crisis that is COVID-19. There have been consequences, an exponential rise in unemployment, a sharp contraction in specific segments of the economy, a massive policy response, and it seems now that we're looking at a K-shaped recovery. What we do know is that the global economy rebounded after contracting by 4.3% in 2020. Vaccinations are now being administered, but if infections continue to rise, coupled with a delay in the rollout of vaccines, then we could be facing a limit on global expansion of 1.6% in 2021. However, as the pandemic recedes and with successful pandemic control, we could be looking at a very different picture, offering a large range of possible pathways for global growth with a possible acceleration of nearly 5%. These sessions are all about intellectual discussion and debate that will facilitate empowerment and affect positive change to benefit all countries across the globe. We will focus on how we can develop a roadmap for the world's leading investors to navigate their way through extremely turbulent times. So, can we transform crisis into opportunity? So we are pushed for time. Let's begin, but first, let me introduce my panel without further ado. Please do enjoy the session. My first guest is His Excellency Khalid Al-Rumaihi, CEO Bahrain Mumtalakat Holding Company. We are very honored to have you on this panel. My second guest is His Excellency Amadou Hott, Minister of Economy, Senegal. A very huge honor to have you on this panel. My third guest is John Studzinski, Vice Chairman, PIMCO, a $2 trillion active fixed income and private credit manager. Welcome to our session today. It's a pleasure to have you on our panel. And my fourth and final guest is Nicolas Dufourcq, Executive Director, Bpifrance. A privilege to have you with us, Nicolas. Thank you all for joining me, gentlemen. Now, if you don't mind, Your Excellency Khalid, I would like to start with you, if I could. Let's start with how our CEOs approaching investments, or how do we think they will approach investments into resilience, given what we've learned through the pandemic and what we continue to learn?
Well, good evening, first of all. I think you spoke about it. Let's not lose the context of the world that we live in at the moment. And I think it's important to have in that context the number of lives that have been lost because of this health pandemic, the number of jobs that have been lost, the dislocation to people's lives. And I think investors need to bear that in mind as they look at opportunities, because there's an obligation to help reactivate our economies with a social purpose besides just a profit purpose. So I think that's important to remember. I think every crisis intensifies innovation and forces productivity to increase. We see that in wars. We see that, I think, at the moment. And what we're seeing now is an acceleration of trends that existed anyway. We've pushed the accelerator and pulled forward trends that were happening anyway, whether it is digitization, renewables, food security. And I believe that investors have to bear that in mind. I think customers or consumers have changed the way they buy, the way they learn, the way they work, the way they bank. And I think all of these trends are going to throw up opportunities. I don't think the trends, everybody knows this, everybody is observing this trend. But what investors have to find out is, how do I look at accessing these opportunities? Most of the companies operating in these space, ed tech, food tech, are young. They're probably not profitable. They're early in their life cycle. So unfortunately, we don't know who the winners are. So accessing those opportunities is a challenge. Do we do it? As a sovereign fund, we see a lot more direct investment opportunities. But we're wary. We don't know enough about it. We're coming very early stage. So I think what investors are thinking about is, how do I access those opportunities? What's the partnership? If I go direct, who do I go direct with? And I think that's going to be very key, is not only understanding the opportunities, but understanding how to access them.
Well, I'm going to bring you in, Your Excellency Amadou Hott, from a governmental perspective, some really interesting points that have come up already. In your opinion, what are the primary drivers of economic recovery in a post-pandemic world?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back to Riyadh. First of all, we need to make sure that the vaccines are accessible. Africa has 17% of the world population. So far, we managed to access only about 1% of the available vaccines. Everybody needs to have access if we want more trade, if we want to have more exchanges of goods and services and people, we need to exchange the vaccines. Number two, we need also to make sure that the private sector can take over from the governments, because so far the governments have invested massively around the world to take into account or to address the COVID-related issues, economic impact, social impact. Many governments around the world have printed new money, those who were able to print new money, and those who were not able to print have increased their fiscal deficit, taken on a lot of debt, and they may not have the fiscal space going forward to do public investments. So the reforms need to be continued to take actually the opportunity of the fact that we are in a COVID situation. You cannot travel, you cannot do many other things, but you can issue bills, you can go to parliament, you can issue decrees, you can really make the private sector strive. In particular, for example, reforming PPP models, for example, PPP frameworks like we've been doing in Senegal. In 6 months, we managed to completely change this PPP framework to make it more accessible, easier for investors, but also to develop a project preparation facilities so that you can prepare projects so that in 1 year time, investors can invest in those projects when they're able to make those investment decisions. And lastly, what we believe in also is the need actually to learn the lessons from this COVID-19. For Africa, for example, investment into innovation, innovative sectors, into agriculture, into health and pharmaceuticals, manufacturing will be key drivers of the growth going forward.
Thank you. John Studzinski, His Excellency Amadou Hott is talking about how he sees we should be looking at the future. In your opinion, what are the catalysts for global growth in 2021 and beyond? The bigger picture, how do you see this? John, can you hear me? I think we have a delay. We'll just check. Okay, we'll move on. I'm going to talk to Nicolas Dufourcq and bring him in now. Nicolas, I hope you can hear us here. Nicolas, given your knowledge and experience, although I can't see either of those two here now. No, okay, we will. Oh, Nicolas, there you are. Apologies for that. Can you hear me clearly? Good, okay. We'll bring you in now because we've just lost John for a second there. Nicolas.
Nadira, I love the name of this.
Yes, sorry, Nicolas. We thought we had John. We don't have him yet. The connection's not great, so we'll go straight to you. Nicolas, given your knowledge and experience and your opinion, what markets offer the greatest opportunities for investors in 2021? And what about beyond 2021?
Well, I think that the COVID crisis is triggering progressively what is going to be probably a super cycle in some sectors. So you probably will not see it immediately in 2021, but we see it at work in our portfolio. As you know, we are shareholders of approximately, I would say, 5,000 companies, so all sectors, and we see some of them which are poised to have an avenue of extreme growth in the next years. I can cite, for example, everything which is related, of course, to climate change, be it tech or non-tech, by the way, because there are a lot of classical technologies which are proven efficient in the climate change, and those companies will grow very fast. I can cite also semiconductors. You're going to see an extreme cycle in semiconductors. You're going to see a very good cycle also in everything which is related to the electric mobility, be it the car industry or any transportation industry. Even in the companies which are in, for example, the maritime transportation. I mean, they have had in 2020 one of their best years. It is counterintuitive, but it's the case. And it will continue because globalization is absolutely not poised to stop. So we are overall, I mean, until we will cross the next 6 months and the vaccine crisis, very positive.
That's fantastic that there is positivity out there, isn't there, Your Excellency Khalid Al-Rumaihi? What new criteria, in your opinion, should investors use to guide their investment decisions over the next 2 or 3 years?
I still believe that the same criteria apply. I think that, fundamentally businesses need to have, at least in this crisis, what we would always look for is liquidity. If consumer demand is going to recover slowly, it doesn't matter if you're vaccinated in Seattle. If your customers are in China or in Africa, you need to have vaccines rolled out in those countries so that demand comes back. So vaccines are going to be integral to getting the whole global economy to come back. Now, whether that's a 2% growth in 2021 or 5%, people are wavering on this. But I believe that consumer demand will have to come back. And back to your question on criteria, it's the same fundamentals. If consumer demand will take time to come back, then companies need to have liquidity to weather that 6, 12, 18-month period until consumers come back. So we look at liquidity. We look at valuation. I think some markets have gone ahead of themselves. And so even if I'm excited about a sector, does the valuation make sense when I come in today? So I believe the fundamentals still apply. But I think that you have to look at new sectors. As I said, it's accelerated development. I think if you were looking to introduce some changes, some initiatives as a company in 2025, then you should be accelerating that to 2021. So what we look for now is, has the company adapted to this new reality, the company that we're looking to invest in? But more importantly, do they have liquidity and is the valuation correct? I think those fundamentals applied before and they still apply today.
John, I can see that you're back online now, so I'll bring in John Studzinski. In the context of sharing your views on the post-COVID world, what do you think are the greatest opportunities, and we're obviously talking a lot about this now, for companies and global investors, in particular, ESG as a key and growing theme?
Well, ESG is a good topic. What I find interesting about ESG is, to a certain extent, the COVID is really the first proper sustainability crisis. So it is really the wake-up call to why ESG has to be taken first and foremost very seriously. And I think while we're impressed with Greta Thunberg as being the sort of Mother Teresa of climate activism, the reality is what CEOs are now finding is that employees and consumers, customers, are actually the biggest activists. And they are expecting companies to be totally compliant in terms of operations, but they're also expecting their pension fund options to be entirely ESG compliant. So I like to think about this as a green industrial revolution, because if you look at the manufacturing sector, which is continuing to thrive during COVID and led by China. And China, of course, will lead the recovery in 2021 of probably 8 to 9% growth. The manufacturing sector still has a long way to go in terms of green technologies introduced across the board into every element of manufacturing. My colleague on the panel talked about semiconductors. It's interesting because obviously Korea and China, Taiwan, will have 75% of the semiconductor capacity, but there's clearly going to be a lot more opportunities as you have this convergence of digital, social, namely social contracts having to be adhered to, particularly in the classroom, and climate.
I'm going to have to move on. As I said before, these are very, very tight sessions. So, gentlemen, I just want a very quick answer from you now. One last point, one last thought that you would like to make on our future and what it will look like using innovative pathways to global growth. Nicolas, can I start with you?
You asking me ideas of innovative pathways?
Yes, please.
I think that the key will be the inclusion of the entrepreneurial community. I mean, of course, we have the big corporations and so forth. They are well equipped and so forth. But there are so many SMEs that we need to accompany, that we need to coach, and that we need to bring towards the technology transition and the climate transition. So it's not going to be possible if we don't follow them door to door and coach them with consulting services and so forth. So I think, but we can do it, and this is precisely what we are starting to do in France, typically. So it's possible, and if we do it, then we will bring the societies towards a great innovative pathways, as you said.
John Studzinski, sorry, I'm going to have to ask you for a very quick answer on this one.
No, I think it's a great question. I think the answer is very simple. Technology is going to allow, if you look at telemedicine now, is a priority for the government of China for the next 5 years. If you look at the role technology plays with people who are handicapped using robots to have a life, that's a major step forward. And you look at the role that technology is going to play in climate. There's going to be so much a transformation in the next 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. And I think we've just seen that clearly as a result of this crisis. And that's the benefit that's going to come out of this crisis. Technology is going to produce a much higher quality of life and many more opportunities than this group can even anticipate at this point.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Amadou Hott, very quickly.
For us, it's really to embrace the COVID-19 as a game changer for more innovation, in particular in the e-learning space, all the way from primary school to the universities. And for many African countries, it's e-learning can help us bridge the gap because of the because we don't have many schools. So using e-learning is a game changer.
Okay, and I'm in trouble now. 3 words to round up your thoughts.
Social capitalism, how we make the public and private sector work like we've seen in COVID-19.
Fantastic. Well, that concludes our FII session, Beyond the Black Swans. What are the new pathways to global growth? Fantastic discussion all over too quickly. Thank you all to my fantastic guests, His Excellency Khalid Al-Rumaihi, CEO, Bahrain, Mumtalakat Holding Company, His Excellency Amadou, Hott, Minister of Economy, Senegal, Nicolas Dufourcq, Executive Director, Bpifrance, and John Studzinski, Vice Chairman, PIMCO. You can, of course, watch all our sessions online, so please do take time and have a look. Thank you all for watching.